Thanks for choosing this free Anfield Index podcast. If you'd prefer to listen to this or any of our other shows without adverts, then now's the time to check out Anfield Index Pro. With AI Pro, you can supercharge your entire listening experience. You'll not only get all of our podcasts without the ads, but you'll have them far faster with our Quick Publish feature available exclusively for subscribers. AI Pro also puts you in the heart of our sound studio, with an option to listen to many of our shows live and interact with the podcasters in real time as the shows are recording. Upgrading couldn't be easier. AI Pro is available on all popular podcast platforms, and we have our own apps for Apple and Android. Just head on over to AnfieldIndexPro.com and get started today.
Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Euro Incision podcast. I'm guessing you're sick to your back teeth of my voice, but it is International Week and we have to just talk about the football. And on this podcast, I am delighted to have a very, very special guest. I mean, I want to bring you some insight into Benfica. So who better than somebody who has their loyalties split and conflicting? And you know who I'm talking about. It's a guy that needs no introduction, but he's going to get one of the same. It's Marco Lopez. Marco, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Nina. Great to be on the show as always.
It's absolutely wonderful having you on, Marco. Marco, you know what? First things first, I'm going to have to go there. So it's a Friday. It's the Champions League draw. You have two teams in there. I mean, I got to get your reaction. And it's a unique, it must be a unique feeling because obviously I've never experienced it. So you got to tell me about this.
Yeah, so I'm sitting there at work. I'm not able to follow the draw live, but all of a sudden, my phone blows up. And because obviously people are sort of sending things to me. And I know that then that means there's only one reason. There can only be one reason. They got drawn against each other, which sucks for me. My first reaction was absolute disappointment and like, no, I didn't want this draw. Because, yeah, I mean, it'll come out more in some of the details as we discuss it. But very simply, this is like choosing between my kids.
Yeah.
I've split affections for these teams. It's a bit of a weird story, but the long and the short of it is, for those who don't know, I'm Portuguese. So Portuguese descent, living in South Africa, and then basically what happens is, for some strange reason, I don't pick up much interest in any sports early on, right, as a kid. But that doesn't stop my dad from absolutely just sort of throwing out Benfica this, Benfica that, Benfica everything at every turn. And to the point, I just need to put some context here. I'm talking about a scenario where, you know, I grew up in a home where Benfica on TV was basically a rarity.
Yeah.
If you got lucky, you managed to sort of somehow hack a signal to watch. Often games would be followed in some corner radio, and you know the men would be sitting gathered around that radio with beer and waiting and hearing about whatever else is happening. I didn't see the appeal because I couldn't see anything. And the weird thing is that. So obviously the memory of Benfica being in my family sort of stuck around. Now, later on in my teens, I picked up football. But the reason I picked up football is because of this little other red team, little sarcasm, is this other red team who just, took in my heart. And effectively, because the English Premier League got so much coverage around here, it was very, very easy to follow it. And it was very, very easy to just all of a sudden sort of pick up this affection for Liverpool. And Liverpool very much introduced me to what sort of my obsession with football as it is now. So in a strange way, Liverpool was the bridge to helping me then finally get a chance to sort of appreciate Benfica, because in later years when thank you internet for being able to actually finally watch Benfica on a slightly more regular basis, I got taken in by the mystique, the same kind of mystique which I think I know in English it's not the same word that's applied, but in Portuguese it's mística. And effectively, I think it's that mystique that I relate the two the same way. So the same way that Liverpool has a certain aura and mystique about it, it's the same thing as Benfica. And I think, it's just, it depends on the community you surround yourself in, if that makes sense. So in my family, it's always been that. The other thing is, I think this is quite relevant. in the same way that, you sort of create this identity, sort of following a team around sort of who they are, you also create an identity around who they're not. So I always just suddenly discovered people would naturally judge or create a lot of preconceptions about me because I supported Liverpool, and guess what? They supported Man United.
Mm-hmm.
The exact same thing happened in the Benfica shirt. And that's why, last funny story, but, when my kids were born, I sort of gave them very simple instructions. I don't care who you support, but if you support Porto United, you might as well walk out. So it's it's that kind of, and that's why I say when this draw happened.
Best parenting advice, by the way. Best parenting advice. I'm just going to put it out there.
Yeah, agreed. So yeah, I mean, and by the way, it's not to say that I have I hold much affection for City, Chelsea, or Sporting either, right? But yeah, I mean, I know it makes sense on paper. A lot of people would have said if Liverpool went the easiest route to the final or the semi-final, was Benfica the weakest team on paper and out of the 8? Yes, they were. I'm not going to be objectively stupid about that, but yeah, my heart sank. I didn't want this.
Well, you know what? Before I did this pod, I was having a little chit chat with my niece, and she's like, "What are you doing now?" She pretends to pay an interest in the work I do. So I was like, "Oh, I'm doing another podcast because I've already recorded with Themis about the reaction to the draw." And I was like, "Oh, I'm going to speak to one of our contributors, Marco. He's Portuguese. He's a Benfica. He's raised as a Benfica supporter, and obviously supports Liverpool as well." And it's going to be really interesting to get his insight. He's going to give me some intel on Benfica. People want to hear this. And she turned around, she goes, "Wow, he's so lucky because he won't be sad either way." And then I stopped and I went, "But he won't be happy as well. Like, what do you do?"
That's exactly right. I think, look, the weird thing about these two teams sort of entering this draw is that if as you'll discover shortly as I'll describe it, Benfica have not had a good season, and they've not actually had a very good sort of 5-year period. There's a lot of nonsense happening in the club right now. So this result was an absolute surprise. Benfica Twitter, it is a thing. Mm-hmm. And Benfica Twitter was absolutely stunned, delighted,
of course.
Sort of with the Ajax victory, because for all intents and purposes, even though on paper Ajax are, you can make arguments about who's the stronger team on paper. You can make arguments about the strength of the Eredivisie versus the Premier Liga. But Ajax absolutely played Benfica off the park in Amsterdam.
Yes, they did. Yeah.
And it was a total smash and grab. Whereas if you look now, obviously with Liverpool, I mean, I'm not trying to sort of tempt fate too much, but there is something fairly historic that could happen, and you kind of sort of look at the situation and say, do you really want either of these stories to end? Obviously, I'm trying not to wear both hats now. I'm sort of almost trying to apply myself as a neutral in that game, because either way, I'm not going to. So I think it's the only time this year where I'm going to sit down, watch 2 matches of football and say, I'm not pulling for either team in this match, because either way I'm I'm more likely to be upset than happy. If that makes sense, until the semis. And then, whoever's obviously got past, then all normal things happen again.
Absolutely. And Marco, you kind of obviously, myself included, I don't know an awful lot of Benfica, and the last time we played them in the Champions League, which I can vaguely remember, was Simao traumatizing me. So obviously that was a long time ago. Talk to me about the 5 years. I mean, like, what is happening? They're not in a good place domestically. I think they're currently third, with a big, but they've absolutely surprised so many people. And of course, surprising people in the group stages as well, finishing second, beating Barcelona, only losing 2 games to Bayern Munich. So talk to me about, where they are right now. What are the issues? Is it financial? Is it board? What is going on there?
So I just want to sort of paint this picture with a little bit of context. I think when Benfica has been led to believe, or at least a lot of the fans in there have been led to believe about that there's very significant financial issues that persist in the club. And for a long time, there's sort of been this I think it depends on which Benfica fans you speak to. One of the Benfica podcasts, which I highly recommend, literally called at Benfica Podcast on Twitter. Those guys probably share my cynicism a bit, but effectively, when you look at what they've sold in the last 5 years, I'm just going to run up some names. Some of these names,
can I just interrupt you about this podcast? Is it in English?
It is in English.
Wonderful.
English.
Wonderful. Yes.
A bunch of great American guys who do this across the pond. They're absolutely fantastic. So, but just to sort of put some context here, and I mean the list of names I'm going to read out here are not by any means exhaustive. There's a lot more players that Benfica have sold, but you think about this list, you think about some of the record prices that have been paid for them, and you ask yourself, why are there financial problems? João Felix, Bernardo Silva, João Cancelo, Ruben Dias, Jan Oblak, Edison, Renato Sanchez, Luka Jovic, Raul Jimenez, Nelson Semedo, Victor Lindelof. That's a handful, man. And wow. I mean, a lot of them fetch big prices. João Felix is, I think, in the top 5 of all transfer fees received. All these sales don't seem to have sort of addressed the debt. Now, in the same way that there's been a lot of departures, the players that are coming in have not been anything like the same quality. You're not. If you think about sort of that list of names that I've read out, there's a certain inherent quality that's been able to get Benfica to a few more group stages consistently and round of 16 matches and quarterfinals consistently. That's not been happening recently. There's been a lot of players that they've spent a lot of money on that, you know, they either have too much hype and they fail, like Raul de Thomas, who was a couple of years back. Rafa Silva, who's in the team right now, came in with a lot of hype. He's just lacked the quality to become a world beater, so he's not necessarily someone who's kicked on and become sort of world class. You've got players who have talent but have sort of inherent issues. Julian Weigl, also a current player in the team, comes to mind. You've also got a lot of players who were once great, but you know they're very much at the end of their careers. So everyone's been picking on Otamendi and Vertonghen in the current squad. The reality is they're perfectly functional for Portugal's league. I'm not sure about the Champions League, but there you go. But then you get a lot more failed transfers. I mean, a lot of money that wasn't spent too well. You look at how they've currently been sort of missing out in Europe. And also the sort of lack of success. Their last trophy was the Portuguese Super Cup in 2019. Their last proper title was the league in 2019. Last season they finished third place. It's their lowest league finish since 2009. That also gives you a sense of the Portuguese league, in fairness. Round of 32 of the Europa League in that season. Runners up in semi-finalists in recent cup competitions. They had a massive COVID crisis last season, halfway through that, which at the time was very significant, and a lot of people blamed it on okay, that's why last season didn't work out. But as this season has progressed, a lot of people just sort of saw that was that excuse had much less sort of weight. Mm-hmm. But off the field, well, so you have all these concerns about squad investment, right? And I'm just want to try and sort of play back a few years. In the last 5 years, Benfica have marched 3 coaches out of their bench. Rui Vitória, Bruno Lage, who's currently at Wolves, and Jorge Jesus, right? Jorge Jesus recently left on the 20th of December. He's the current caretaker is Nelson Veríssimo. You've got this controversy with the current name president in a sense. Vieira, Luis Felipe Vieira was effectively he was re-elected in a very controversial election back in October 2020. What he did, a lot of people felt, to win that election, he spent lots of money all of a sudden in the beginning of that season, brought in some players, brought back Jorge Jesus as a bit of like a prodigal son because of his previous success in coaching. But then everything went insane. July 2021, Vieira gets arrested. He's accused of aggravated fraud, tax evasion, money laundering.
Oh gosh.
He's suspended, having with the evidence having found that he's filled his own pockets with additional commissions on many Benfica transfers, 55 and counting. Rui Costa then gets placed, the Rui Costa, by the way, then gets placed controversially into the role, and if for those who understand their Portuguese would have heard him very choice words being spoken about some of his decisions in press conferences since. He's not popular anymore, which is quite sad in the way for his footballing legacy. Probably the thing that most irritates me, because I always come back to the football, right? The reason those 3 coaches got the sack is identical. The players mutinied on those coaches, and they all got them the sack. And the one that I'm most angry about is Bruno Lage, because I think that Bruno Lage, if you look at his tenure when he took over Rui Vitória, I mean, in a half season, he takes Benfica from a very undefensible position to winning the league, well ahead of Porto. Even manages to register an insane 10-0 record victory over Nacional. It was absolute magic. So something's very, very, very strange, and that's why, like, again, to put in the context, I fully accept people, can sort of look at the Portuguese league with their criticism. Porto and Sporting are not better because they're not winning because they're significantly better. They're just winning because they're making way less mistakes and not shooting themselves in the foot the way Benfica have. So when you look at this context around Benfica in the last few years, what you've seen, before we talk about the current season anyway, but what this club has allowed itself to do is completely capitulate. And then all this other off-field stuff, it has to have an effect. It has to, create concerns about the financial structures, about who's running the club, the cliques in the locker room, etc. It's not a good place, I have to admit.
No, it does sound absolute chaos, and I'm just trying to it just seems like everything just doesn't seem cool, and I think that's what makes it even more remarkable that they've made it this far. And you were speaking about Bruno Lage there, and a coach that kind of upset you, that got marched out and things. And I guess I'm speaking to you now, not only as a Benfica supporter, but maybe as a Liverpool supporter as well. It must be quite reassuring to know that things are actually going quite right for Liverpool, because can you imagine if they were in that hot mess as well, like they were a few seasons ago? And, to do, like, I don't know how you'd cope, Marco. I'd be sending you care packages every week. Like,
yeah.
It would be awful.
I think, look, not to make this a sudden FSG debate, but that's why, when people, for example, ask me about the sort of the FSG in or out debate and which side I'm in, I'm on that. I'm just a lot more liberal and a lot more accepting of sort of the context of where they're at. I'm very willing to throw at FSG that they're still far more reluctant to pull the trigger on investment than I like. And I think that we can show evidence where that is objectively true in terms of gross spend, especially compared to the edits we're trying to beat to win the league this season. But if you're honestly going to try and tell me that Liverpool is not an incredibly well-run football club by comparison to, so I mean, the last 10 years are chalk and cheese to what I'm old enough to remember Martin Broughton somehow trying to convince us that, pulling in Roy Hodgson was sort of the right sort of interim step, and then obviously presiding over the sale to FSG. Roy eventually gets sacked, and Kenny Dalglish comes in to sort of try and set things on the right course. Those are dark days.
Yeah.
Not to mention, obviously, before that with Hicks and Gillette, in terms of how they were just completely not looking at Liverpool in the right way at all. So I think even though Liverpool, thank God, has never been sort of at the tendency of this sort of corrupt behavior that I described with Benfica, and by corrupt I mean obviously the president, not Benfica the club, by the way, but it's so blim and reassuring that you see just sort of how long Liverpool have sort of taken to implement this really stable, structured model. It could be a lot worse, and I need to stress sort of, so whenever people look at the current Liverpool team, and there may be a few less trophies we'd want, or a few less wins we'd want, or a few less players we'd want, crikey, it could be so much worse. We can appreciate quite a lot how Liverpool have improved.
Absolutely. And you was again today. I recorded a podcast with my excellent co-host, Themis, and you know what? I love a bit of trivia, and and it's good to be educated. And he told me about the Gutman curse.
Yeah, the Gutman, and it's funny you speak about that curse. For those who don't know, Bela Gutman was a Benfica coach, highly heralded from the 60s. Damn, I hope I don't get this date wrong. It's quite important because effectively what happened is his departure from the club was unfortunately fairly. Yeah, it wasn't on the best of terms, and effectively Bela Gutman placed a curse on Benfica that they would not win a European trophy of any kind for 50 years. Sadly, if you look at Benfica's track record in finals, it's proved to be correct. Very correct. And I think we're very close to the expiry of said curse. but it's something which Benfica's obviously felt very very plagued by. It's a fascinating piece of trivia, albeit a very depressing one for Benfica.
Yeah, I know. I was like, wow, when he it's good to be educated. When he told me about that, I was like, I need to ask Marco about this. And is it something that fans still talk about till this day?
Yes, it's which was it? 2013 against Chelsea in the Europa League. And keep in mind, the Europa League for Benfica is a big deal, right? Because you can't, with the financial structures, and I always have to remind people, but Benfica may, in terms of global fan support, in terms of sort of global brand recognition, it's a huge club. It's an absolutely huge club. You got to speak about. It's a beautiful coincidence Benfica and Ajax were drawn together because it spoke to a lot of the history both clubs have, across the world in terms of the fans they reach. But in financial terms, clubs like Swansea City have more money than Benfica. And it's a horrible, insulting thing for me to think about, but it's just true. Imagine. So when Benfica go into the Europa League, they take it very, very seriously. I know Liverpool fans don't, strictly speaking, but that's okay because I think Liverpool objectively should be aiming for the Champions League every year because they obviously can win it. Anyway, Benfica were in the final against Chelsea 2013. Benfica were leading, if I recall correctly, 1-0 off Oscar Cardozo penalty, if I'm not mistaken. And then 2 very late goals from Torres and Ivanovic, and that was it. It was very, very depressing.
Awful, absolutely awful. And, even more awful because of the team that won it as well.
Yes.
It just, more salt into that wound. Marco, I mean, we are talking about, let's get back to current day now. And obviously Benfica have made the quarterfinals. And I know obviously it's not, we're sat here and you have to educate us because I'm going to be real with you. I don't watch Benfica. The only times that I will watch Benfica is like the highlights on the Champions League and things. So I guess what we want to ask is, I know it sounds awful and you might feel like a double agent or a spy. But, talk to us about, their style of play, what are their strengths, what's their formation, what's their system?
Okay, let's maybe just if I can also just give some context to the current season as well, because one of the things you also got to keep in mind, the team's approach has been a little bit sort of indecisive and erratic. Beginning of the season, they started under Jorge Jesus. Jorge was sacked at the 20th of December because effectively the players mutinied on him. So the caretaker, Nelson Veríssimo, has come in. Nelson's a bit odd. I think he's made 2 significant choices. The first one is he's chosen to abandon the 3-4-3 Jorge Jesus had implemented at the beginning of the season. Keeping in mind that Jorge had done that because the centre-back has not been spoken about enough is Lucas Veríssimo, who Brazilian centre-back that Benfica got from Santos, if I recall correctly. Fantastic player, was playing absolutely superbly well. Got a ruptured cruciate ligament injury, which obviously knocks him out for the rest of the season. And I think that's why a lot of people weren't necessarily noticing any of the age deficiencies in Vertonghen and Otamendi next to him in particular. Now, Veríssimo was chosen to sort of go more to a sort of 4-4-2 type of config. But that's not necessarily yielded the kind of results that people wanted. And I think the other biggest challenge is he decided to implement this at a time where January is a critical period for Benfica because within the space of a month they've been dumped out of the Portuguese Cup a Porto in Verissimo's very first game as caretaker. That was a 3-0 loss, lovely. Another 3-0 loss in the league from the same team, so that's out of the title race probably, and then they lose the League Cup final to Sporting at the end of January. So by the end of January, you're effectively Benfica's pretty much out of the running of all 3 teams. The only sort of possible shining light is the Champions League, where Jesus managed to pull off a good result against PSV to get them to the group stage. Yes, it's a weak Barca. It's certainly not the Barca that smacked Real Madrid 4-0 this weekend at the El Clasico. But you can only beat who's in front of you. So
absolutely,
100%. So the fact that Benfica actually managed to sort of pull that off is fantastic. They were very shown up against Bayern, which Nagelsmann's comments afterwards against Benfica makes me feel that, it was in a strange way, Nina, I'm very happy about the semi-final draw, because I kind of feel like, even though I make no sense with what I'm about to say, if Benfica was to beat Liverpool, it would be a nice attempt for revenge, even though I think that's very unlikely. But if Liverpool get to the semi-final, they better damn well embarrass Bayern for me. Anyways.
We'll smack them up for you, don't worry about it.
And obviously for Liverpool's benefit, of course.
Yeah.
Now, more importantly, I think, this 4-4-2 that Verissimo has been implementing has been a lot more effective, say, in the last few months, last few weeks, sorry. So you're seeing effectively a 9-game unbeaten winning streak. That does include the 2 Ajax games, unbeaten streak, sorry, not an unbeaten winning streak. But it's a little bit sort of, again, it's a bit of a lucky packet, because this is the weird thing about Benfica. They go into a Premier League game, and they're pretty much the Barca, the Bayern, the Liverpool. They are expected the teams will park the bus against Benfica, and then they'll be having to sort of adapt that very sort of attrition kind of style of play. And if you look at some of the players that they have, a lot of those players do prefer to play a lot more in the counter, play out of space. Ironically, not dissimilar to another red team we both support.
Oh, okay.
But when it comes to the Champions League, that's been different. Against Ajax, both ties, Benfica's I think sole moment of coming out of themselves and really trying to be a little bit more aggressive, as opposed to sort of almost looking like they're parking the bus and smashing and grabbing, is in that second half at home, which is, to me, that's actually where the tie was won, because Ajax showed up in Portugal, they took a 2-0 lead, they went to sleep, Benfica got the 2 goals back. That's where Ajax lost the tie. It wasn't 1-0 at home in the Netherlands. But Benfica it's a very sort of odd team to try and judge stylistically. They love counter-attack football. They're a very combative team in defense. The midfield's very soft in my view. You've got a lot of players who love speed, love to run at people. Darwin Núñez loves to run at people. Rafa Silva loves to run at people. They're all fairly decent passers. I wouldn't say it's the most creative team in the world. So it's stylistically, it's certainly one of the more average Benfica sides I've had the displeasure of watching compared to recent years when I've seen the sort of in the mid to 2010s.
Yeah.
So that hopefully gives you a sense of how they like to play.
So I've got some Discord questions here, and there's one that you kind of ties up nicely to what you've just said there. You never walk alone, Foodie, here with a question. What are the key strengths and weaknesses of this Benfica team? You kind of said the midfield is a bit...
The midfield's a bit soft. The midfield's a bit soft. I mean, so let's dive a bit into it, right? So in there you got Julian Weigl. Julian Weigl is... It's strange. When he was signed from Dortmund, I thought, this was a very interesting coup almost for a Portuguese team, because you don't normally see it that way around. As an example, ironically, one of Weigel's ex-teammates, Axel Witsel, made a very big impression in Benfica about a decade ago. I was very sad to see him go, because he was super special, still is really. Weigl, I think Weigl, unfortunately, and Dave Hendrick mentioned it in one of his previous sort of roundups. It's pretty much as that. This is someone who had a lot of promise. A lot of people speaking of him as another metronome, and he still very much is metronomic in the way that Sergio Busquets would be. But he's not as convincing defensively as one might think. He's not an especially effective tackler. He's not an especially dominant defensive midfielder. He's functional, Nina, and that's probably the best compliment I can say. He has been the most consistent part of the midfield, though. But I think it's also probably because there's very few other people who can sort of really dominate in his position. And Benfica have tried a few players before him who weren't successful. You've then got a bit of a revolving door around 3 other players. So you've got Maite, who's a French midfielder who's, I have to be honest, in his signing, I'm still trying to figure out what he does, in the sense that he's not a defensive midfielder, he's not especially creative. He's just sort of, again, someone who sort of is there and ticks things over. He's not the kind of person you sort of look at picking out a particular pass. He's sort of a big unit, so he's quite athletic, but I think beyond that, yeah, I wouldn't necessarily say he's someone Liverpool have to fear. João Mario, who would be no stranger to anyone who's watched Inter, if I recall, and West Ham. He's definitely on the latter part of his career in terms of sort of his skills and abilities won't put the fear of God into anybody. Had some recent absences because of COVID, but again, not especially creative, not especially defensively helpful. I think one of the things you'll find with the way Nelson Verissimo coaches this team is a lot of the brilliance in what you see Benfica produce is very much about the players and has nothing to do with the tactics. So, and it's very true of the midfield as well, if that makes sense. And then you get this this player who you sort of you want him to succeed because you've seen him waste his career, and that's Adel Taarabt.
Yes. QPR.
Insanely skillful. He's shown shades of it in Portugal. He did a lot to sort of get his career back on track. Try to get himself back into some physical shape. He also looks like a big unit now, but it's just it's a lucky package. You never know what you're going to get. I do. Maybe it's the bias just because I love attacking players, and then Benfica has so few of them. He does show the propensity to be able to give out a pass or run with the ball. None of these midfielders, with the exception of Taarabt, really give you the sense that they can beat a man on the ball. All that happens in wide positions with players like Rafa and Everton and Darwin Núñez. But the midfield, it's not, and that's why I say it's a very soft team. In a soft touch in that midfield. So I think it's the kind of situation where, if I'm Jurgen Klopp and maybe the first leg I'm testing it out, but I wouldn't be surprised if by come Anfield time, Klopp says, you know what, Curtis Jones, Oxlade-Chamberlain, Naby Keita, you three can handle this pretty easily, or even Harvey Elliott as opposed to Keita. Go do it, and I think they do it because it's just. There's an element of soft touch about that midfield. Unfortunately, it's a part of the Benfica team I'm least pleased about.
Gosh, and we've watched football long enough to kind of know that you kind of do need a bit of a solid midfield. But you did say something there that it's more about individual brilliance rather than a setup or tactics and formation. So that's going to be really interesting. So basically, what you're saying is Liverpool just be on your guard because they can literally just do something insane at any moment.
Yeah. It depends on the players, right? So I wouldn't. I don't think you need to fear the midfield for that kind of thing. And I hope I'm not like speaking anything into existence. Again, that's just purely for the Liverpool benefit.
Yes.
But if something insane happens, I think it comes from three players. The first and obvious place is Darwin Núñez, who I think, especially with Luis Diaz now wearing Liverpool colours, I think he's now the best player in Portugal, pretty much. He's the current top scorer in the league. Yep. He's easily the best player in Benfica, and you've got, this is someone who is tall, strong, he's fast, he's got great feet, he's combative. He's got that Luis Diaz never say die type of attitude as well. And I think, given how disappointing he was last season, he's become uber confident. I think what's been interesting about him, he's managed to perform again under both managers. He hasn't scored any hat-tricks yet under Verissimo, but that should give you a sense of the criteria, Nina, because I'm just judging him by hat-tricks now. He's been able to serve as a threat from both the counter, which I think is where he likes to play. So, for example, go look at the goal he scores against Barcelona as an example of the kind of goal he loves to score. Mm-hmm. He scored many goals like that, but he's also dangerous from set pieces. So, and again, to the point, obviously, the goal against Ajax. So and I think what's interesting about him is he's very good at finding half spaces. So if there's a vulnerability, because he likes to linger on the left, he likes to linger in the half spaces. This is someone who, if I'm worried about anything as a Liverpool fan, I'm saying, okay, Trent, Matip, Fabinho, Henderson, etc. Just be mindful of where this guy is, because he's probably going to sort of be occupying the three of you. The other two players I'd worry about, but maybe it's a bit of a lucky packet. It depends on what you expect.
Mm.
So Rafael Silva is an unusual one because he's got something that you can't teach, which is speed. He's got insane foot speed. The goal that he scored against Estoril this weekend will give people some indication, even though I think everyone will look at that and say, "Oh, better defenders around him would stop him," which is probably true. He's got 15 assists. That's not only the highest in Benfica; it's the highest in the league. But what's ironic is when you consider that in the average league game, Benfica are playing against teams you typically sit back and park a bus.
Yeah.
He's a lot more effective against those teams, which is weird. Whereas against any opponent of serious strength, so your Portos, your Spartans, your Bayerns, etc. Ajax, he was terrible against Ajax. He was absolutely anonymous against Ajax. So I think what's surprising to me there is if I'm looking at something that should worry. If it's someone who can in fact match Robertson or Trent in a foot race, or can run at Matip and have him asking questions, Rafa Silva is that guy, but he doesn't seem to necessarily perform that. He's got it in his locker. The other one I think that's the most interesting maybe someone that Liverpool might just want to pay attention to, only because of how Liverpool systemically work on that right-hand side. So I think a lot's got to be looked at of how whoever's playing on the right hand of that midfield handles Alex Grimaldo. So this is he's been a solid left back. He is a bit of a lucky packet. But I think what's been interesting is that the way he's synced up with Darwin Núñez, in particular on the left-hand side, has been very useful. Hasn't had as many assists this season as one would like, but you can see that he's a lot more sort of an attack-minded fullback than a defending one, even though against Ajax he was absolutely massive in the latter department. Definitely one of the veterans of the team. And I just think what's interesting is it's not he's got the capabilities. He's not slow. I think he's someone who's going to be looking to go forward. And if there's a propensity for Liverpool systemically to suddenly forget about what's happening on that side of the field, yeah, you could find a situation where Grimaldo puts in a good pass for someone like Darwin Núñez, and vice versa.
This is like quite interesting, right? Because you've literally just taken Steve Pizza from Discord. He literally just asked, which players is Marco most excited about? And I didn't even have to ask you. So there you go, Steve Pizza. There's your question answered. I mean, so obviously they've got some players, and I think what I want to ask you now is, how do Liverpool set up? I mean, how? In terms of defense, you spoke about set pieces and threats. So yes. I'm thinking now, whilst you're talking, how do Liverpool? I know you say that Liverpool are the better team, and I think a lot of people are saying that on paper as well with Liverpool's form and everything. So I'm thinking, who would be best suited as a centre-back pairing? I mean, Virgil van Dijk is there. We know he's good in an aerial sense. I've been really, really impressed with Ibrahima Konate, and I don't know if it might be his time in this game.
I think whoever's chosen, I think would be perfectly suited to deal with what happens. Because I think a lot of this for me, Nina, I feel is about the supply into Darwin Núñez rather than Darwin Núñez himself. Because
you got to cut his supply off, aren't you, basically?
100%. So I think and if I'm Liverpool, given, and this is going to hurt to say, but I'm just going to say it. If I'm Liverpool, given the sort of quality difference, you want to wrap this up in the first leg. You want to wrap this up in the first leg as much as possible because inherently, I think the one thing I don't think Benfica have had to deal with is an Anfield crowd. And that, I think, is going to be a massive, massive, massive difference. With all due respect to what happened in Amsterdam, that doesn't happen in Liverpool for me because I just don't think the Liverpool fans allow that to come across. So I think the more Liverpool rock up in Portugal and just sort of, mind you, I'm just double checking. We are playing in Portugal first, correct?
Yes, we are.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. So the more Liverpool take advantage of that first leg, the way that should line up should happen. Now, I think from a defensive setup perspective, Konate can handle what's there. You also got to keep in mind that typically what happens is, and it's been interesting just sort of the last couple of games. So Darwin Núñez will typically play off someone like Roman Yaremchuk or Gonçalo Ramos. Gonçalo Ramos, young, sort of latest academy prospect. I wouldn't say he's especially special, but it's been interesting to see him sort of play recently. He's been able to get some good goals sort of feeding off the back of his teammates. But he hasn't really been sort of particularly impressive against higher quality opposition, so I wouldn't necessarily be scared. Yaremchuk, I think it's interesting. He's tall. He's deceptively quicker than his size sort of indicates, but he's not especially dominant in the air, and I think in that respect that sort of shows in his goal record as well. He's not massively prolific, so I don't think this is a situation like you'd have to worry about the likes of a Konate or a Matip, and definitely not Virgil van Dijk having to sort of deal with these guys. In fact, I'd even go as far as to say what might be an interesting thing for Liverpool to test out. Vlaco Dimas, the Benfica goalkeeper, he's definitely having a better season than last. He's a good shot stopper, 100%. But this is and he's got fair distribution. But I think his weakness is in the air. So to the extent that you've got, this for me is prime for a great deep cross from Trent, testing out, sort of Sadio Mane heading down, or even Virgil van Dijk, Joel Matip from a corner. I think that's a definite weakness for Liverpool to exploit.
Well, thank you for that. And in terms of, so we could definitely attack them on set pieces. And in terms of where we could potentially win this game, I mean, like, obviously you watch both teams. So, from what you've told me, I think, the big thing here is going to be, the midfield, in my opinion. Obviously Liverpool have a very, very good, strong midfield now. So I'm guessing would players like the likes of like Thiago and Fabinho just completely just marshal and just, snuff out any kind of threat, even though that midfield is non-existent?
100%. For me, the one thing you want to avoid is giving Darwin Núñez the 1-on-1 or 1-on-2 kind of scenario because that's much harder to predict. And I think if Benfica's got a sort of a game plan sort of mapped out, I would be shocked if Benfica decides to sort of go to toe-to-toe Liverpool. I wouldn't recommend it because I think it is pretty obvious who would win. Benfica would logically try and do a smash and grab and win by attrition and try and defend. To their credit, it worked against Ajax. To their credit, it worked. But I think, for obvious reasons, Liverpool are going to attack very, very differently to Ajax. Now, if Benfica want to sort of hit on the counter, you've kind of got to look at protecting the outball. That tends to come from people like Grimaldo, people like from Julian Weigl, João Mário, and I just don't believe that that's something that Liverpool won't have the quality to already sort of snuff out. Once Darwin Núñez is in a foot race, it's a little bit harder to predict. I have to admit, but other than that, I think there's just, I don't know, Yaremchuk in a 1-on-1 versus Alisson. I know who I'm picking. The same thing for Gonçalo Ramos. The only player I'd be wary of is Núñez in that situation.
And I think he's kind of like been the highlight of what people have been talking about as well, in terms of a Benfica and their Champions League sort of run. And, it's quite fitting that he got the winning goal, I'd say. And in terms of their defense and our attack, I mean, how do you see that one going? I mean, and I'm assuming Diaz will have a part to play in this. And how has Diaz's history been? I know you probably don't want to kind of relive those moments of him in a Porto shirt, but like, how has he fared against that defense? And, if he's like, I mean, please share some insight.
Yeah, I mean, it's weird because, first of all, I just need to sort of remind myself now because there's been so many Portugals against Benfica. I'm trying to remember specifically who's Diaz ones. That's how many I have to wade through. Oh. Anyway, but I think what's interesting is, Benfica do have this unfortunate tendency to allow themselves to just sort of start dropping back and before you know it, you've sort of afforded way too much space to the opposition. And I think what's interesting about the Liverpool front line, that for me is one of the key and obvious things to exploit. Vlaco Dimas is a good shot stopper, but testing him from distance by all means is a good idea. Equally, I just don't believe that the Benfica midfield's that equipped to pick up all the nuances of, well, this is where Thiago's decided to pass. This is where Henderson's decided to position himself. Here's Luis Diaz running at Gilberto, who Gilberto's one of those right backs who you kind of love because he gives you work ethic, he gives you work rate, he's 100%. He's just not of a great standard. It is what it is. So Luis Diaz running at him scares me, if I'm honest. Equally Sadio Mane, right? Because obviously Sadio could also play in that role. I think in the middle it's a little bit different because to his credit, Otamendi obviously is past his best, but what's been interesting about him coming into this team, he's very much sort of taken over the mantle of leader, has earned the captain's armband as a result, because he's just been far more combative, far more never say that. I love these South Americans; they're all the same. So effectively, he's just kind of done that. So even though you've got the inherent obvious weaknesses, no, he's not as quick. Yes, I think people like Virgil van Dijk will beat him in the air, but he's gonna leave something behind. So I think Otamendi's one to avoid, but I don't think he's a quantity that is he going to stay with a quick clever movement from a Diogo Jota or a Mo Salah? Hell no, I don't think so. Vertonghen the same. Vertonghen has the advantage of obviously being experienced and has a height advantage, but I just don't think they're going to struggle with sort of the sheer volume and Liverpool quickness. The other thing I'd also stress is if you look at that midfield again, Julian Weigl, not the most effective sort of defender and man marker on the whole by comparison to the quality that Liverpool usually play against. So when you think about that, and the rest of the midfield don't always get involved. You've got often people like João Mario that don't track back, or Adel Tarap is too busy looking for the counter attack pass. Maite not sure what he's doing. So it's those. A lot of the defending is very much that back four. And given how Liverpool attack, Liverpool would score goals by sheer attrition at that point. Definitely exploit the space and the pace Liverpool have, but I just expect Benfica to sit too far back to create that space. So I do think you're going to see a lot of football played in Benfica's half, and that might frustrate Liverpool fans for until whatever point a goal is scored.
Interesting. I mean, just two more points I want to ask you, and then I'll let you have the final say. First of all, I've got to go there. How does it feel as a Benfica supporter sort of cheering on or willing a player to succeed called Everton?
It's funny. I because the weirdest thing, I'm pretty sure it was about half a year ago that the Everton were interested in Everton. I don't know how that was going to work, but anyway.
I'm thinking of the club.
Yeah, exactly. So for those who don't understand, Everton is a Brazilian winger who plays for Benfica. He's been it's not been very easy to cheer on him anyway because he's been so inconsistent. He's one of those guys, he gets in the ball, you start thinking this is the second coming of Angel Di Maria, and then it doesn't happen, and then you're disappointed. So it's a bit like that, right? Look, I suppose in the strange way, Nina, it's not dissimilar to cheering on Luis Diaz when he used to terrorize me in a blue shirt. But there's so many examples of this. Probably the one I'm conflicted the most with is actually historically is Raul Meireles, who played decently for Liverpool. Obviously, played slightly better in Chelsea. I hated him at Chelsea because he reminded me of how I hated him in Porto and just became that absolute. Yeah, there's a word that I would use, but I'm very polite.
You are very polite. Yeah. I feel you. I mean, I guess my next question, Marco, is, mind you though, on the flip side, I bet you were delighted when Diaz came to Liverpool because it's like one thorn at your side.
Absolutely.
And he just added a little bit of energy and a bit of class and pizzazz to the other team. It works in your favor, my friend.
Absolutely.
And I think the next and final thought, I mean, you've kind of alluded that, Liverpool were naturally happy with this draw, and I think a lot of Liverpool fans are. And I think them and Villarreal are probably seen as, Liverpool have got the more favourable side of the draw, should we say. So
Yeah.
obviously you are a Benfica Liverpool supporter. So you know what? I'm going to ask you, what does your heart say and what does your head say? I'm more interested about the heart, by the way.
So if are you asking? I just want to ask: are you asking the prediction or what I want?
Both. Go for it.
Okay, what I want is I want these teams I want them to do the redraw and someone else to play Benfica.
Okay.
Like, I don't know, maybe Villarreal would have been nice. But look, I think you heard this sort of dramatic expose on how things have happened for Benfica. Benfica are in a very, very difficult state, and I'm always a bigger picture person. It's a bit like when. It's a bit like when, for example, someone looks at the success of Brendan Rodgers very close to winning the league, and then all of a sudden he's given a lot more control over transfers. And I'm one of the people who looks at it and says, I don't think this is a good idea, because he didn't succeed winning transfers. He succeeded by doing other things that stayed away from that, and the quality of players that were brought in after sort of spoke a testament to that. My point is, when you look at a bigger picture situation, if Benfica beats Liverpool and gets to the semi-final, does that now suddenly turn this shambolic season into a success? I think the answer has to be no, because a lot of things have to be addressed. And the one thing I'm struggling with is this sort of idea that I'm not saying you want a team to lose, but you certainly don't want success to get in the way of a problem that has to be dealt with. So. And not to mention that, ironically, this result has also put Darwin Núñez in an even bigger microscope. And where I thought Benfica might get away with one more season of him, I think it's almost guaranteed he leaves, and very likely to England, because already the Arsenal rumour's looking quite strong. I think there's even a Liverpool rumour there somewhere, but I doubt it. So, if effectively my head and my heart are both sort of combining to say Benfica wins this, the way it can be used against Benfica, ironically, is bad, and that's why I conflict with that, which sucks, because then any Benfica fan listening to this is saying, okay, well, you're clearly not a real Benfiquista. We're firing you from the fan base.
Luckily, none of them will be listening, so it's fine. You're safe.
But then look, obviously on the flip side of this, look. Liverpool, at the end of the day, let's also be very serious. Liverpool have a genuine opportunity to win this competition. Are they one of the few teams left in the running that can beat Bayern? Absolutely yes. Are they one of the few teams? And you spoke about being on the other side of the draw. That's fantastic. Even though I don't necessarily think Real Madrid is as good as people say, but I think what's interesting about the other side of the draw is more the fact that Chelsea and Manchester City are going to beat themselves up a bit before they face whoever makes the final. If Liverpool manages to beat Bayern after beating Benfica, obviously, and makes the final, then I think it's just it puts a bit of shape on sort of what is turning out to be. I know all like sort of joking, oh, it's a quad. It could be a quad. Well, you never know. Like it really, and I think that's the wonderful sort of evolution of how this team has got to where it is. I also think that it's just, I'm not saying that facing Bayern over two legs is better than facing Manchester City over two legs per se, but I would think that you want to give yourself the opportunity to beat a team over 90 minutes, and I think that's probably a better way to try and sort of have to navigate Manchester City, if that makes sense. That's why even like the FA Cup semi-final, which if I recall correctly is also only a one game, also probably sort of suits Liverpool to a large extent, because I think there's just a lot more big match temperament that Liverpool can bring to the table. So I think rationally it would make sense that Liverpool would be stronger. It just hurts, Nina, because like the weirdest thing, I'm probably going to end up watching with my dad, and my dad doesn't pull punches. So when like all I hope is that there's no controversial goals, or someone doesn't get seriously injured, or
a clean game, basically.
Yeah, exactly. Because I mean, if someone said, Marco, would you take a? No, actually, no, I wouldn't. I'm not going to do that. But if someone said to me, like, I wouldn't want anyone to be embarrassed. I wouldn't want any injuries or like serious impacts, if that makes sense. I do think, I would say rationally as well, last point, is Benfica going through is obviously a challenge in respect of sort of, do I think Benfica has a chance to win this competition? No, unfortunately I do not. I think it's just, and Bayern absolutely, unfortunately embarrassed in the previous time. I don't think they'd be able to beat Bayern over 2 legs. So, whereas obviously Liverpool do have a lot more capability to do that.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen the anguish there, and it reminds me on the flip side, and it is a flip side because we literally watched the final between last season in the Champions League between 2 teams that we hate.
Yes.
You know, and you were sat there and you were numb because even when Liverpool are in the Champions League final, there's one team that you probably would root for a little bit more than the other. You know, be it them being an underdog or, you know, there's one team that you hate more. But this one, it's just like, I can't stand you both. And I felt the same way when United played Chelsea in that final as well.
You
So 2 times.
Well.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's funny about that because like you always, there's certain teams where I'm not saying I enjoyed losing to Milan in 2007, obviously, but in contrast to 2005, right? 2005, Istanbul, you kind of look at it logically on paper, is like that's an insanely good Milan team. You wouldn't have necessarily begrudged them, and I think a lot of those players were also inherently likable. There were a lot of legends in that team, Maldini, Nesta, etc. Seedorf as well. Whereas, I mean, I don't know. The only team more unlikable than Chelsea and City is the other team that plays in red in England. So, yeah.
And they're not in the competition. So.
No, they're not, which is wonderful, right? And they're probably and please Arsenal, just sort yourself out, finish 4th, so that we don't because this capitulation of United is really funny, and we Liverpool fans must please just milk it for what it's worth.
Absolutely. Well, you know what, Marco? I have absolutely loved our chat. I have loved the education. You know, I think it's definitely something that people would really, really appreciate because a lot of us didn't know what was going on with Benfica. And Steve Pizza actually put in a question, and he actually said, "What has been going on with Benfica? Because they keep drawing Porto. And you've just kind of touched on that on what's been going on in the past 5 years and where they are and." You know, it's good to know these things, and you know, I truly hope they do sort themselves out because you know they are a massive football club. Do you know what I mean? They are huge.
Yeah, I do.
They're historical and they're iconic, and you know, you don't like seeing great, you know, football establishments like Benfica to be suffering like that. So you know, hopefully they get sorted, and I think it's great that they've made it this far, and you know, and I hope this is where they stop now.
Accepted in the context and spirit it's said, Nina. I will say one thing. I think also just, you know, as Liverpool fans, we can also appreciate this is it's not, you know, if what's interesting about the Premier League is you do have these other teams around Liverpool that have also become stronger. I know we tease Spurs, but actually the way they've evolved since the 90s is incredible. The way that obviously Chelsea improved, unfortunately, is incredible. Manchester City, okay, that's a bit of a different story. I'm not going to give them credit, but the point is, you know, we can all appreciate sort of someone getting there by default because we shot ourselves in the foot. It's the exact same thing with Benfica, and that's the worst way to drop. You don't want to drop because you couldn't be as good as you were. You want to drop because someone else is better. If that makes sense. So this just, that's why it hurts, because you kind of look and you think, but these are just so many dumb, stupid mistakes. Why are they making them? So yeah, I share your hope and optimism for the future.
Oh, Marco, thank you so much. And listeners, if you've heard earlier in the pod, the Benfica podcast is a must listen to. So, you know, get on that. It's a little plug. And Marco, if people want to follow you, and they should follow you because you're awesome. And we appreciate the insight, and I love the education as well. I'm sure all the listeners do as well. Marco, where can people find you on social media?
They can find me on @footyml on Twitter. They must just sort of brace for, I'm usually obnoxious and...
He's not. I'm shaking my head.
But yeah, no, they can follow me on Twitter for now. And then of course, doing more of these, luckily with all the Anfield Index colleagues, which is great.
And can we just say the content has just been so enriched with having you back on? It just feels like the good old days. Hey, you know what? I've got a throwback for you, all school listeners. Marco used to host the Europa League pod. Do you remember?
I did.
Yeah.
It was one of my parting gifts. I still, it's very funny. I still sort of show a few people all the old episodes. I presided over the Europa League final against Sevilla. I think that's right. Yep.
Yep.
Still sort of fondish memories of that. But yeah, it was always cool because what you end up doing is inherently forces you to sort of speak to fans of other random clubs. And when I say random, I'm not saying that is the flippant statement, but just how many fans of Ruben Kazan would you know? I managed to track one down. It was incredible. Proper education
Professional people. Just those pods were excellent. I had the honour of being on the Man United one because obviously we played them in the Europa League, and
yes.
The format and the setup was absolutely brilliant. You know, Marco is as good as a host as he is a panelist. Just so you know, yeah. So, guys, thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this podcast. Take care. Enjoy the international break, and till next time, up the Reds.
Up the Reds.
We hope you enjoyed listening to this Anfield Index show. Please be sure to subscribe to our channel so future podcasts find their way to your device automatically. There's nothing quite like fan engagement, and we'd love to know what you think of anything discussed on this show. The best way to get in touch is over on our free Discord community, where both podcasters and listeners debate the hottest LFC topics 24/7. Sign up free now at AnfieldIndex.com/Discord. You won't regret it. You can also follow us on Twitter at Anfield Index and find us on Facebook by searching for Anfield Index. Oh, and before you go, we'd love it if you could leave us a 5-star review on your favourite podcast app. It only takes a couple of seconds, and it means the world to the people who create these free shows.